Tom Kaczynski here. It looks like, if I'm to believe the clock on the microwave here from the room, it's 8:17 a.m. United States East Coast. Welcome to another episode of Sunrise in Pineland. Thank you for tuning in this morning. Coming to you from the road. We're actually down in southern Maine to take care of a couple things. Dana's got a big doctor appointment today, so please say a prayer for us. Definitely would appreciate that. For everyone who wants to support the program, just a reminder, we are fully funded by your support. That's why you don't have to watch those annoying commercials, which I shut off, which frankly had nothing to do with the program anyway, but nonetheless, your help is much appreciated. It allows me to do the stuff that's required with this. It takes hours of research every day to do this program. And as you can hear, my voice is a little hoarse, so forgive me if this isn't my best, vocalization, but we'll make a good effort of it anyway. So. No, I'm okay because when I'm talking, I'll just choke on it. I got some hot chai here, so I'll be all right. So, if you want to support the program, the Venmo CVC PRV, PO Box 343 Eagle Lake, Maine 044. I always forget 04739. I'm so bad about that. And of course, super chats are enabled. So thank you for your support, those of you who do. So let's talk about what's happening with Russia and Ukraine as we go. They were having peace talks somewhere along the Belarus-Ukraine border. It's being kept secret for the time being, but the Ukrainian position is they don't want to give anything up and they want Crimea back, and the Russian position is, okay, we'll keep bombing you. So I don't expect a whole heck of a lot to come from that. I do want to comment more on the larger implications of what's happening, which is that the West is getting drawn into this war. And you have to wonder if that was their intention all along, to draw Russia into this battle. You see that European countries, Poland, UK, other countries are getting drawn in. Denmark sending volunteer brigades. You can't say to Russia that you're not going to have NATO in this war and then have a whole bunch of volunteer special forces just suddenly pop up as advisors. Like I was reading last night about a unit of 10 guys that had some Germans, some Brits, and some Americans going in there, as volunteer brigades. Although it's an interesting thing. I mean, if you wanted to pick an example of it, you could look at the Spanish Civil War in a similar way. It's not something people talk a lot about, but that in fact there were massive foreign brigades that came in, and you see Zelensky, the president down there in Ukraine, pushing very hard for that. Nonetheless, it appears that the Russians have quickly increased the amount of effort they're making. Some of you will have seen that huge thermobaric bomb that they had set off. Some people thought it was a nuke, and just so people know, not every mushroom cloud is a nuke. There's a lot of really big bombs and big ways to have explosions, which are frankly just as lethal in many ways, that are being used in this conflict. What we are seeing is the Russian forces on the ground are winning this war. The propaganda war being aside, but whether or not they win on the ground, what that means in the larger sense. So, well, let's talk about this in two different parts, right? We're going to talk about the war on the ground in terms of the military conflict that's happening, and then we're going to talk about the economic war and what that means in the longer term, which probably has more resonance for most of our viewers, unless you happen to live in Ukraine and Russia, in which case the Lord's blessings be upon you and may He keep you and your family safe, especially if you're a Christian. Okay. So Mariupol has been surrounded, and now they are in it. What do they call it? The Russians call it a cauldron, which is to say they're completely surrounded from the sea. There was a sea landing from Russian forces into the Sea of Azov. I believe they landed 2,000 Marines. So the city is functionally surrounded. Russian forces continue their march into Kharkiv to control the northeastern sector, and they're marching towards Odessa as well as we speak. We are seeing that there is Ukrainian resistance being offered in Kiev, as there have been Russian forces marching southward on both sides of the river, and there has been heavy bombardment happening overnight as the Russians try to destroy the ability of the Ukrainians to offer any sort of what should I say, air resistance. There are sporadic things. There are shoot downs. I think the Russians have reported they've had, I think they reported over 300 casualties. I think that number probably is higher than that. I mean, this is a war, but one of the things that I've noted is, despite the propaganda, and you would know the difference, by the way, if they were indiscriminately bombing. The Russians have been very deliberate in trying to minimize civilian casualties. And there have been some videos of places in Ukrainian cities where a whole bunch of people having arms. There's been some looting. But generally speaking, this has been, as much as any war can be, pretty orderly. And that is a commendation to the military forces on all sides. So that's good. What we've seen something interesting. So on the war front, Russia is winning. And a realistic assessment of how long it should take them to solve this, based on what maybe America did in Iraq, and other situations, considering that Ukraine's getting real-time NATO intelligence sharing, would be 14 to 30 days if they were trying to fully occupy the country, which they may or may not be. It seems to me the current strategy for Russia is to surround the cities and to avoid getting into urban warfare where possible. That's where the high casualties will happen. That's where the high civilian casualties, the damage. And we'll see if the Ukrainian government can hold out that long or if Zelensky leaves. There was a story I was reading not even 20 minutes ago, apparently, that's what were they saying? 60 U.S. Marines have come in to Lviv, and they are helping to evacuate Zelensky out. And that you see the European Union now, interestingly, signaling hard they want Ukraine in, which is a strange development in a lot of ways. You see Ursula von der Leyen, because if that happens, you are seeing the rush to remilitarize Europe. You saw Germany yesterday. Olaf Scholz was saying that Germany will now spend over 2% of their money on military development, and that will make them, by spending excuse me, the third largest military power. And we see also commentary in Sweden and Finland that they're looking to move towards joining NATO. There was a referendum in Finland that got over 50,000 signatures that requires now their parliament, whatever it's called up there, to have a conversation about joining that. And they seem to be moving quickly in that direction. And in the other weird world books, Kosovo has asked for NATO admission. Which is hard because NATO's not supposed to pick anyone who's in a frozen conflict, and there's a number of NATO members, including Greece and North Macedonia, that don't recognize the existence of Kosovo. But given that Serbia is firmly in the Russian camp, I wouldn't be surprised to see if NATO doesn't break their rules again as it relates to this. On the economic front, we are seeing that the Russia's airlines have been blocked from overflight in pretty much every European country at this point. We are also seeing Russia has responded with reciprocal measures. So you are seeing planes take very weird things. To this point, the gas has not been cut off. The promise is that the Russian banks will be cut off from SWIFT. They will have an alternative, of course, that will keep certain things going. But that the blockades are running, the Russians are being pulled out of the World Cup. And what I don't even know how to say this, but it seems like cancel culture is trying to do a hybrid form of political informational warfare, which we'll call cancel war. They're trying to disconnect Russia entirely from the world systems that exist, thinking they're trying to cancel Russia. And I have a hunch before it's all said, the bear will say niet. What is this functionally accomplishing? Well, the Russian currency is plunging this morning. The ruble's down over 50%, and the Russian bank has stepped in to make sure that there are price supports below which it won't go. And what we've seen is countries that are sort of playing more neutral to Russia have been Brazil, India, and a little bit more friendly has been China. So remember the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, who remembers they were looking at the problems of how the currency war happened. And one of the things that we've seen is that there is an effort underway to expand the efforts to offer an alternative to the SWIFT system that these countries will work for. And it is very likely that China will be able to subsidize Russia. Excuse me, China will basically be able to subsidize Russia if they want economically because they have that amount of power, and China has not cut off any economic sanctions on either side to this point, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. Although it is important to keep in mind and keep a very close eye, China is right now doing military exercises in the South China Sea that are supposed to continue, I think, through at least Tuesday, maybe Thursday, I don't remember for sure, but we definitely will have to keep an eye on that as this plays out. So, what does this mean? Western diplomacy, such as it is basically tacitly allowing NATO forces to help Ukraine. EU forces are streaming in there, and Russia has been saying that, this is something that's unacceptable, this crosses red lines. I mean, notably, a lot of people are making press of the fact that a major Russian TV anchor said, as it relates to nuclear war, if the world isn't going to have Russia in it, then what does Russia care if the world exists at all? Which is a typically, and no, it's fine, it's a typically Slavic expression of the way they think of things, but I think it is actually an accurate view of how Russia might see the world. In this case, and we do sit at the brink of what could very quickly become nuclear war, because Russian military doctrine does call for the ability of tactical nuclear use. If Russia decides that in bad faith that, NATO is prosecuting this war, which given the fact that now we are hearing that planes will be given to Ukraine with presumably EU volunteer pilots, you really have to ask the question now, is NATO basically entering a war with Russia? And if Russia wants to make that conclusion, they definitely can do so. The evidence on the ground agrees to it. Whether they want to do so and contemplate that larger war is a big question. And do they want to get into a major theater theater war with NATO. They do have the ability for a nuclear first strike option as well as other options. And I think the important thing to remember, as the media is going out there and saying the Ukrainians are doing so great, is Russia has only committed about 5% of its forces into the actual Ukrainian incursions because they seem to be holding back for the idea that they may have to fight a war with NATO. And another thing that's important as it relates to this is the thought that Belarus may actually formally declare war on Ukraine as well on the Russian side. And we see Belarus passed a referendum yesterday, which went and said that they are no longer going to attest to not being a nuclear power. So what does that mean? It means the Russians can put nukes in Belarus in about 5 seconds. And everyone's talking about nukes these days. Germany's talking about nukes. Japan is offering to host nukes. So everyone's going to have nukes. It's great. The world's going to be white hot phosphorus. It's going to be lovely. The future's so bright. The future's so bright. I gotta wear shades. All right, so get good sunglasses. That's your prepping tip for today. Something that blocks out, I don't know, the sun. It's kind of crazy out there. And I will say this, the biggest problem with this whole thing is there's no off-ramp. Russia's basic demands have not changed. Ukraine, now being bolstered by the full of Europe, is not going to back down either because their government in exile will be willing to fight if that's what ends up happening. So, well, that's fine if you don't believe in nukes. But what I will say is major theater level warfare goes forward. The thermobaric bombs can do as much damage as a nuclear weapon, so it doesn't really matter if you believe in it or not. The point is, Russia can do a whole lot of damage very quickly, very easily through multiple means, including conventional options as well. So, Russia doesn't have an off-ramp to this war, and that being the case, I think it continues to accelerate. I think it continues to get larger, and I think Russia will make the conclusion that the United States wants this war, is supporting this war, and at some point may look at doing a larger theater-level war. And the question is, where do the Chinese fit into this? And we've talked about that quite a bit on this program. Do the Chinese want to, is this a double cross so they can get Russia out of the way and get East Siberia on the cheap? Or is it part of fundamental challenge to the new order with China at the center and Russia as their ally in that? And we don't really know. I mean, and it sounds crazy, but you know what? It's like World War I. Italy jumped sides. And actually, halfway through World War II, Italy jumped sides again. The point is, don't have Italy as your ally. But yeah, pasta, right? Italia. But it's definitely a very unstable situation out there. It's unlikely to get better in the short term. And by the way, Ben, thank you for sending all the information. I've just been on the road. I don't have time to consider all of it. I'm sure it's very good. I mean, I looked at it. My brain is fried. So it's, a little aside here, before I go, I'm down in civilization, and damn, it sucks. I can't wait to get back to my small town. I mean, I really don't like being down here. And it's not that anyone's been mean. It's been perfectly pleasant, but it's so it is microwave, but it is like sleeping in a microwave. But it's just so hectic. I mean, you just can't hear yourself think. I've become a small town guy, and I don't think I'd ever want to leave that again. And it's interesting. You get a perspective watching from a distance, not being in it. And what you're willing to accept when you're in a hurry is very different than when you're not. I was just telling my wife before I came out here that if my choice was to go retreat into a hobbit house in the middle of nowhere or have to be involved in life, I would choose to retreat. It's just we've been watching this for so long, and in some ways, I guess we're a little blown out from watching all these details. But it's like I've been waiting, and I've been seeing terrible things happen, and I know my own predictions. I had a conversation with a friend last night who was kind enough to visit while we were down here, and we were talking about it, and he had said, we were talking some of my past predictions that I had made, and that usually what ended up happening was I got the story right, but the speed wrong or the numbers wrong. And the problem is, good morning, Christy. The problem that you run into is you're only as good as the evidence and facts that are out there. And I think that's an important thing to remember. This at the heart of the story of what we're watching in Ukraine, for instance. And we'll use COVID as an example. When I was watching those videos coming out of China and I was reading the lab reports, my conclusions were not wrong. Based upon the evidence I had, I expected a mass death scenario that was absolutely horrible. And that may yet play out because of certain things related to what's the other, V, that in certain ways that, we aren't supposed to talk about on here. But if the evidence was accurate, my projections would have been right. And so what you have to chase, and this is the hard part of the game, is where the evidence is true and where the evidence is false. And the propaganda is crazy out there. Much of the Western world is being actively propagandized from a pro-Ukrainian perspective. And I'm not anti-Ukrainian, by the way, but I'm saying that, like, when you start posting videos of victories that are disconnected to reality, and you start doing this level of propaganda where you can't even connect it, because it's one thing to spin a story, it's a whole other thing to falsify it. It's the same thing we saw in Canada, where they said, "Oh, a woman tried to throw a bicycle at a horse cop," whereas in reality, a horse cop trampled a woman with a scooter. That was the reality of it, and the video came out, and when the reality is so disconnected, the analysis is wrong. But people who don't bother to look any deeper for their information than what they want to hear will believe the story. And they'll believe the story about the plucky Ukrainians, fighting against the evil Russians, who had no reason to go in there and they invaded a sovereign country. Never mind the fact that NATO used the same precedent in 1999 in Kosovo. Never mind the fact that Donetsk had been getting shelled by the Ukrainian government for at least 6 years. All of those facts get disappeared into history. And now we have heroic people going to go fight for the volunteer LGBT brigades with literally actually real life Nazis and Muslim terrorists who came from ISIS who have been contracted to fight for Ukraine. So every one of the Rainbow Coalition, I'm not even kidding. Yeah, they're getting those people. Remember, who was Syria? The Russians were attacking them in Syria, so they're more than happy to go to fight Russians directly. The Turks are making it happen. This is like the real war of it. You want to talk intersectional terrorism. It's interesting to see that Antifa fits on the same spectrum with these people. And if you look at it, and who are the victims? Of course, it's the people of Ukraine who are being caught up in this. Who, frankly, if their government was just willing to stay neutral, they could have been perfectly fine, made money, and not had issues. And so you say, well, don't they have a right to make their own decisions? Sure they do. And that's why it's really upsetting when you say that, okay, yeah, Ukraine has the right to make their own decisions, but that wasn't the case after a coup was conducted there in 2014. So, and you guys know the history of it. It's not important, but what I will tell you is on the ground. Russia is winning, but they're trying to cancel it. And the West is trying to draw Russia more and more in, but they're going to lose one big battle, which is that the dollar as a reserve currency is being existentially threatened by the actions of this administration. And one has to conclude they want it to happen. Because if Russia and China, one of the world's biggest militaries and the world's arguably either largest or second largest economy, depending on how you want to classify it, escape and don't use dollars anymore, and they have support from countries like Brazil and India and Saudi Arabia. We spent all that money fighting for them in Iraq. They're saying, oh, no, we're not cutting Russia out from OPEC+. Plus. So if the U.S. and Europe thinks they're economic heavies, they can throw that weight around, and then you see that they don't have any productive capacity, and their currencies stop being used because military parity has been reached. What you're going to see is inflation give way to hyperinflation, and hyperinflation led to great poverty. And why would you have countries in the West seeking great poverty over their people? Because then they can remilitarize and say people who are domestic opposition are terrorists, because they say Russia, wasn't really the cause of this, which is something you should be afraid of. They've been pre-scripting that for years, and maybe they were smarter about this. We've heard for years they wanted to go into Russia. This goes back to Clinton, and that they are now setting the table. Sorry, they've done enough damage to the international. Am I live? Okay, it looks like the clock's good. Sorry about this. I don't know why I'm having problems. I'm on a secure network, but who knows? At any rate, so we would then see the destruction of the international currency system. And if Russia shuts off the gas pipelines, the amount of pain that's going to come on Europe is going to be absolutely crazy. And so what does that mean? It means we are being pushed into a bigger war. And all the propaganda, I'm sure, is not making the Russians any less likely to push forward with that. So what am I predicting? I continue to predict this war will get larger, because who's going to stop it? It's like a runaway chain reaction. And the problem is no one is looking at the facts in this. So let's see what you guys are writing real fast. Let me say good morning to your family. Grand Flash, good to see you here. Marco Rubio has classified intel that Putin may have cancer. Yeah, well, we'll see. Marco has always never seen a war he doesn't want. He needs to go back to the bathhouses, right? I'm frankly sickened by Putin trading his new Chechen Muslim fighters in Christian. Putin can't flatten Kiev because of its 1,000-year-old Russian Orthodox churches. The thing that's interesting about the Chechens, I really didn't know a lot about how that war resolved itself. Basically, Putin said to the Chechens, you run under the Russian Federation and you can be a vassal warlord army. It's interesting. And it's something that has a long tradition in Eastern politics. By saying that, I mean the Central Asia, really, of having, client vassal hordes. Actually, if you think about it, the famous war of, the siege of Vienna, that's one of the reasons the Turks lost, because their vassal allies ran at the side of the Polish cavalry because they didn't want to fight for it. They'd been there too long, and it wasn't just Polish, too. There were 30,000 cavalry, if I remember right. I think 6,000 6,000 were Polish, and I think the other 24,000 came from the Holy League that was risen from to support the Holy Roman Emperor from southern Germany primarily. But it was the largest cavalry charge in history, which is a cool little side point note to remember. Not that you guys care about the history of 1683. Nonetheless, what we see is that the Russians have surrounded the cities they need to surround, and they're moving quickly to secure what they want in the country. Russia will dictate the peace in Ukraine if they want to not expand that war, unless NATO goes in even further. And at that point, they're inviting a larger counterattack from the Russians. And if Russia goes into war with NATO directly, which could happen even because of a miscalculation or because of a third party actor, that war is on, and you would expect probably the odds are decent that China will invade Taiwan and then win World War III, and who knows how that goes. What it would mean is the loss of all your liberties. Countries across the world would march into martial law, and our governments would say, we have to absolutely support them. And then you're going to have to make your decision if you're going to support the government, considering the sort of things they promote, or if you're not, and if you're going to offer resistance, on what terms. Of course, you'd be looking at peaceful things here, at least to start the conversation. All of this could be happening in a matter of days. I know that sounds crazy, but the thing about it is that we have not seen restrained foreign policy from the West. We've seen them throw in, and basically, if I think if Ukraine is included into the European Union, that in fact that will be used as the excuse to get a much larger war here. Now, will that happen? I don't see why it won't. I don't see why they're signaling against this, because you have to remember something in this whole story. If it doesn't seem sensible, remember what we talk about often on this channel, that the elites are fighting a war between countries in concert with one another against people who they don't want to have a say in their future, and that they've done some pretty bad things to us. If arguably, you could say the injections we've had, beyond the destruction of civil society, beyond the destruction of wealth, of social mobility, also the health vulnerability on a lot of people. And it's no accident that 2 weeks ago, before the convoy, before what's happening in Russia, we were talking about the number of people who were getting sick, the number of people who were continuing to get sick, the deaths from all causes going through the roof. And if you need to hide a lot of dead people, what better way to do that than in the misery and suffering of a war where it's every person for themselves and states fighting one another? So as we honestly march through the horsemen of the apocalypse, that's what we're literally seeing from a Christian perspective. What we might expect to see is a larger war accomplishes several things for the state. It allows more totalitarian control. It allows them to eliminating opposing views of speech. It allows them to destroy the debt bubble they've created and introduce a new currency by unilaterally resetting it. And if all the countries at war with one another agree to forgive different debts, what ends up happening is they can start over, basically, with the same scam all over again, and they can retain their power. And that's what we ought to stand against. The understanding that this is something that's being done to all of us, beyond any political view. But as is usual, the woke horde is leading the way and following and being the biggest supporters of the state, and saying that the same people who were scared to death of literally the flu are now going out there, and some of them, I'm not even kidding, are volunteering to go fight in brigades in Ukraine. And it just goes to show you the power of propaganda, and it's something we shouldn't underestimate. However, certain civilizations are more receptive to propaganda than others. I would argue the West is completely lost in its service to the propaganda state. Whether or not Eurasia is, the Russians, whether the Chinese or not, or whether it's part of a larger plan, I can't say fully. But this is something we absolutely have to take a look at. It's very difficult. That's something that is the consideration that we are going to have to make a very careful consideration on, and that I don't think it's holding together well. And I think that the danger is that in a total war, then any dissent will be completely silenced. And what will be at the other side of this? I mean, look how much liberty America lost from 1938 to 1948. What a different world they came into, and they never went home. Same after World War One. There might have been opposition. I bet there was a lot of opposition to the Fed and income taxes and whatnot, and it was destroyed in a wave of patriotism. So now Europe is seeing the same trick that was pulled on the American people being pulled on it, while we're seeing a military put forward. And some shrewd observers have said to me, well, a European Union military wouldn't be very effective in the field against the Russians. No, it probably wouldn't be, but it would be very effective at being the pseudo-police state where you can control the people of those countries in part of a larger major plan for how the European superstructure is going to work as a bureaucracy. The EU has always needed a police force to bring down its own nationalism. Now they have an enemy, Russia. They have an excuse, this war, and they have the ability now to put police and military over all their people and to unite this and finish this project they've wanted for a very long time. So, depending on how you look at it, if you think that, the current woke ideological vision of the future of technological transhumanism is something that's a good thing that unites people, then you probably should support the Ukrainian side, not because Ukraine really wanted that so much, but because that's where their government is leading the rest of Europe. It's the tail wagging the dog, and it is making sure that happens in the U.S. and Russia, or excuse me, U.S. and Canada. Conversely, if you think that's a horrible thing, then you got to hope the Russians somehow figure a way to break this up. But the problem is, to break this up would require the loss of the West in a major conflict, and then with unpredictable outcomes. And that's why you see a lot of people adopt what essentially is an accelerationist idea of saying that you want to see Russia win because it's the only thing that can stop the global homo empire from running amok. And I use that term because that's what the Russians use, and I think it's an accurate term, to be honest with you. I mean, you can even look, the head of MI6 was out there saying, don't forget, in the middle of the war, the most important thing we fight for is LGBTQ rights. You make your own judgments about where you fall in that. We do see that other countries, interestingly, Brazil, have been very sane in holding out of this, Argentina as well. And this is a war between Europe and Russia about the vision of what it means for Western civilization and how East Eurasian civilization is defining itself, pulling its periphery back in there. And Russia's saying, okay, we're not going to be a part of this anymore if you guys want to go crazy. But whether or not they're going to do that in a way where it's so unstable they fight each other, that's the story we're going to be watching today. I do anticipate the war will continue to hasten. It will get worse. Russia is moving methodically to accomplish what it needs to do. And we're going to see what the Europeans are able to do. And the West will not hesitate to use its hybrid warfare strategies. It will bring in mercenaries, and you'll see groups like that are brought in, ISIS-type fighters, paramilitaries, and volunteers, which are really probably European and American military forces being brought in undercovers. On the other hand, the Russians are using Chechens. There's no doubt about it, that they've sent Ramzan and his army, Kadyrov, them in there to do fighting. And it is a messy situation down there. And the real loser here is Ukraine. The people of Ukraine are not represented by their government. I don't think they're really represented by the Russians, and they're certainly not represented by NATO. They are just trying to survive, and I give credit to the Poles as a sign of solidarity in opening their border more freely in this instance, getting rid of this absurd idea about COVID restrictions, not allowing people in and letting the Ukrainians come into that country. We're going to see how that plays out in time. So what to watch for? If Russia decides NATO has gone to war with it and it wants to prosecute that war, it will launch a first strike of some sort, whether that will be limited to assets in Central and Eastern Europe, or they will contemplate a larger strike against American military targets from their impressive submarine fleet. That's something you need to be ready for. My own thought of Russian strategic doctrine from the bits and pieces I've read is that they will contemplate going bigger for the maximum advantage to limit the ability of sea and air superiority. And I think that if you are looking at the U.S. Navy carriers and whatnot, unless the U.S. has a much better defensive system than any of us knows about, those things are at severe peril right now. I should also mention Turkey has closed the straits of the Bosphorus here to both combating sides, the Ukraine and Russia, for people to go through. Kind of a neat little trick on their part. Of course, people can go forward, and I think that I agree with you, Mikong, that Ukraine will eventually be absorbed into the Russian sphere at the end of this, unless the war happens immediately, in which case then all bets are off, and we're going to be commenting on World War II. Or World War III, rather. And if it happens, hey, I'll be there doing it with you. I'll be watching it. I would say, for the moment, all we can do is watch and pray that cooler heads prevail. But I can't escape the reality that every step of the way, the West, NATO, UK, and US have been pushing very hard to make Ukraine make decisions where war was more likely rather than less likely. And that has not changed. And as it has not changed, look for this war to continue to advance and accelerate. In the meantime, what does that mean for the domestic front? Expect price rises to continue. Expect gas prices to continue to rise. Insane that they haven't continued, opening up oil availability. But remember, these people don't want to have a free and prosperous West. They want to have a totalitarian controlled West, which is why they continue to say we're fighting for climate change. At the same time that Europe, if Russia shuts off the taps, is going to freeze to death. Remember, they get power when you're miserable and suffer, because if you're miserable enough, you'll give power just so that the misery goes away. We've seen that that's what they've done to us through COVID. We've seen that's what they did with the convoy, and it should be no surprise that that same strategy will be applied through conflict. So that's my review for the day. We're going to do a short show this morning because I am still out. I'll be back home later this evening, God willing, and I'll be very happy to be back there. Please consider supporting the program. This exists because of your help. CVCPRV is the Venmo. PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739 is the zip code. And thank you for your support. Join the Telegram group, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And I just want to say the same prayer I've been saying for a little bit here, but this holds true. Heavenly Father, I just want to say a prayer for the people of Ukraine who are victims of this, good Orthodox Christians, and God bless them and keep them safe wherever they may be. We'll see what happens from here. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. All right, God bless each and every one of you. I'm going to go drink some more tea to help my throat. And just want to say thank you for being here with me during the program. And please, if you haven't joined Telegram yet, please consider doing so. It's not going to be long before censorship is going to be abominable. Make some friends. Prepare. Do get gas. And if you are near a major city or near a major military base, please be very aware. Russian targeting is pretty precise, but there's been so many rumors about New York, man. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I know people don't want to believe it. If I hit it too hard, you'll think I'm crazy, but I just don't see. If you want to reset, if the goal of this, whether it's the elites, whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Americans, whether it's Mossad, whoever it is, if they want to reset the world currency system, you got to break the dollar. The way you break the dollar goes through New York. Remember that. That's just something that's inescapable. And everyone who wants this, because there's a lot of people who want it for very different reasons, will look at that as a necessary sacrifice. I hope I'm not right about that, but there's a lot of reasons, including things in biblical prophecy, to think I am. So if you're in New York area, please leave. That's all I can say to you. I don't want to be accused of being anything, but I'm just telling you logically. Now's the time to decide what you really care about. Can't serve two masters, okay? Leave the money behind. God bless you guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.